qualify for student loans. There are some good organizations out there like Windmill Microlending who give loans to internationally trained professionals who are looking to reaccredit. So there can be some good options there. And of course, thinking about the budget versus value dynamic. So, can I manage the cost of something and is it worth it to me? So sometimes if your budget simply won't permit you to pursue a particular option at this point, it might be off the table for now, and maybe it's something that you do longer term. But in some cases, if you can swing it, if you really see the value in that option, it's certainly worthwhile. Length and time commitment. So again, a degree program is going to typically be your longer time commitment. Um, uh, for example, at Osgoode PD, in our LLM programs, we have some that have full-time options that are 1 year. All of them have part-time options that are 2 years in length. We often will really encourage people to think about the part-time options if they're working, because that allows them to keep having income coming in, keep doing the professional networking that comes from their job. And so really important to think about, to be successful in a particular undertaking, is the time commitment right for me right now? Are there adjustments I can make to make sure that I'm successful in this process? Because you want to make sure that you can satisfy whatever the learning outcomes of that program are so that you get to that goal that you had in mind. For some people, the credential that you get is important. And so some people like the idea of doing an LLM degree as part of the accreditation process, because then they have that additional academic credential. For other contexts, that's not important at all. And so just one of the factors to keep in mind. And then also really important, especially if you're looking at different options that both nominally get you to the same goal, is again on that issue of value. What are you getting as part of your program? Are you simply getting the learning? So for example, if you're doing a certificate or non-credit program, you're likely just getting the learning, the substantive information. Whereas if you're doing a degree, for example, like with us, there would likely be lots of other things that come with the degree. So for our students here, we offer academic support, career support, and also wellness support. And that comes in lots of different forms. So we try to make sure that students are getting lots and lots of value for that tuition that they're paying as part of the program. And you'll want to look at, are those services that I want, or those services I could benefit from, just to make sure that the value proposition is right for you. And so I'm going to turn my mind to questions that have come in on the chat. Excuse me. And in the meantime, as I do that, I will put up here our website and also the email address for our recruitment team. They are more than happy to be contacted at any time. We run information sessions on a regular basis. And so I know some of you have questions that you're comfortable asking today, but others of you might be more comfortable in a one-on-one setting, or you may want to send us a resume and get some advice on program options. So we're more than happy to do that if you wish.
Megan, thank you so much for that excellent
Welcome.
presentation. You've brought up a lot of key points. You've emphasized the importance of clearly defining short-term and long-term goals, basic things, with a focus on commitment and envisioning desired outcomes. That is definitely the starting point. And thank you for the valuable insights that you've provided into the various educational pathways and accreditation processes required to practice in Canada, and highlighting the need for assessment, proper assessment.
Welcome.
You've explored various career options, alternative career options as well for those not um, wanting to go into active practice and addressed practical considerations as well throughout this journey, including the support that's provided by Osgood. So thank you for that very comprehensive presentation. And Michael, we'll wait for your presentation as well. In the meantime, there have been a number of questions that have come up. Michael, you've answered a couple of questions as well. But let me start by asking you the first one. Can paralegal courses be offered by an NGO in Africa? Can that be used to be a licensed paralegal in Canada?
Okay, so I'll start by a little bit of context about paralegal work in Canada. So there's currently only one province, which is Ontario, where paralegals are a licensed profession. And so to become a paralegal in Ontario, a licensed paralegal, there is a specific process that you have to follow. Um, I don't think they accept any out of Canada training. There are accredited paralegal programs here in Ontario you can do, but that would probably be a specific question for the paralegal licensing division at the Law Society of Ontario. So I can't speak for them on that since I'm an expert on lawyers and not paralegals. In all of the other provinces in Canada, um, the the concept of a paralegal or the type of job that a paralegal does depends on the organization that would employ them. And so I think in those jurisdictions, international experience and training might make you quite competitive for a paralegal role. And it would really be looking specifically at the job requirements of a specific role. Um, you should also be aware that there's lots of other terms for legal support professionals that are used. Law clerk, legal assistant, um, legal support, legal process support. Those are all roles where experience working as a paralegal or paralegal training elsewhere might be relevant.
Can I ask you if there is a glossary of terms or some sort of a document that can help
Not
with these
really.
terms? Yeah.
No,
Okay.
yeah, because it's those are things that are not specifically regulated. It's really up to the employer to sort of define what they're looking for in the work, and they would sort of set their own title and requirements.
Okay. This is another question about becoming a paralegal. Do you have a CORES course? Course? Is that how you'd say it?
So
Uh,
I answered that in the chat. I think those courses are
Okay.
specific to Alberta. And we at Osgood PD don't specifically offer those. However, to the rest of that person's question, again, it speaks to sort of paralegal versus lawyer licensing, which I think a lot of our participants on this chat are considering. So again, if you are intending to become a licensed lawyer wanting to practice law and represent clients in a legal capacity, many of you who have previous law degrees could be eligible to go through the accreditation and licensing process in the different provinces. However, if those of you are interested in sort of other types of work, not specifically being a lawyer, again, it's really on on each person to sort of look at the jurisdiction. What is the kind of work they're interested in? Does that qualify as a legal assistant or a paralegal, or does it require something a little bit more like a law degree or the NCA accreditation and becoming a licensed lawyer? So I think there is a little bit of confusion in our participants, understandably. Again, a lot of this terminology is jurisdiction specific, but for anybody who has sort of a previous qualifying law degree who practiced law before, your only option is not to just be a paralegal, you can certainly go through accreditation and become a licensed lawyer in Canada if that's what you are looking for.
Thank you for that. Um, I'm going to ask a question that's just come in. I've applied for assessment. Should I worry about any NCA policy changes during the next 5 years before I complete the whole process to qualify as a practice lawyer?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the NCA's assessment policies have been relatively consistent for quite a while now. There are periodic changes that come in, some of those more significant than others. What's important to know is once you receive an assessment, that is binding on you and on the NCA. So if you have an assessment that says you are required to do these 7 subjects, and that has an expiry date on it of 5 years into the future, if the NCA's policy changes and becomes more onerous, unless they make the policy retroactive, which would be very unusual, you are able to satisfy your assessment as long as you do that within the 5-year period. Um, if you had an assessment and the policy became more favorable, it would be open to you to apply for a fresh assessment if you preferred to be assessed under the new policy. Um, and then there's a category of applicant who receive sort of an advisory letter from the NCA. So if you don't have sufficient common law exposure, or if you have a degree that isn't accredited, you might receive a letter saying you need to go back to school in Canada, you need to do a certain amount of educational um, pursuits, and then we will reassess you. That's actually not an assessment and it doesn't have an expiry date on it. So it would be once you had actually done those steps that the NCA asks you to do. So, for example, if you're a civil trained lawyer, they typically give you a letter saying, go do at least 4 courses from this list of 8 subjects that are common law subjects. Once you've actually done that, you would submit a transcript to the NCA. It's at that point that they would assess you, and your assessment would be under the policy that is in effect at that time.
Thank you so much for that. I think we'll move along. There are a number of questions that are still to be answered. Keep the questions coming. We'll see if we have some time at the end after Michael's presentation. And there is also the email on screen. So please write that down and you could send your questions directly. So once again, thank you for that, Megan. And next up to join us on the Canadian Immigrant Web Conference series for internationally trained lawyers and legal professionals, offered in partnership with Osgood Professional Development, is Michael Tan. Michael is a program lawyer, professional graduate, and international programs at Osgood Professional Development. He does program and curricular development and academic and career advising for graduate law students. So welcome, Michael. And once again, if you have any questions for Michael, feel free to type them in the chat by clicking the chat or the Q&A button and typing them on the right-hand side. And we will get to those questions after Michael's presentation. And a reminder that should you have to leave, this is also being recorded and posted on our YouTube channel and website. So Michael, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Ramya. And thank you, Canadian Immigrant, for asking me to speak. This is a topic I'm very passionate about because I myself am an internationally trained lawyer who sort of struggled through a lot of this process. And so I really find it rewarding trying to help other people navigate this otherwise very confusing accreditation, licensing, job market. And to be fair, the Canadian legal job market is unique. It's very different from a lot of places in the world. And so hopefully these next couple of slides and sort of the advice I'm going to give you is going to help you navigate and figure some of that out. The first thing I always like to address is some of the shifts in mindset that need to happen. It's not lost on anybody that there, are all these perceptions about what internationally trained lawyers are, what they can do, what they're qualified for. And so, as a candidate who's coming into this space, coming into Canada, coming into the Canadian legal job market, I want you to remember that some of the things that you hear are false. So one of the things that you hear all the time is, I am not as competitive as a Canadian born Canadian JD, Canadian law student. And that is just false. Even in the chat so far, and all the questions that have come in, it's clear that many of you are coming in with amazing experience, coming in with years of practice from abroad, corporate lawyers, NGOs, lots of different sort of fields that you're coming in with, maturity that you're coming in with. And the legal market here, employers are going to care about that. They are going to value that. The difference between you and somebody who is going through a Canadian JD program, for example, is a Canadian JD program is 3 years, where during those 3 years, they are immersed in this space. They are taught, they are given advice on how to navigate this legal market. Whereas you, as an internationally trained lawyer or an internationally trained legal professional coming into Canada, you're not familiar with the process. And again, because it's so confusing, because there's so many different jurisdictions, terminology, roles, bodies that you have to deal with, you're less familiar with that process. And so, of course, it's great that you're on a session like this, speaking to people like myself and Megan and the rest of the Canadian Immigrant team. Also, realize that there are lots of resources now out there externally available to internationally trained legal professionals to help you navigate. So make sure you join some of those associations and join some of those webinars as well. And then if you are fortunate enough to be one of our students and I get to work with you, Megan gets to work with you, we can also, of course, clarify some of this process. We work on giving presentations about the accreditation and licensing and how to satisfy requirements all the time to our current students and are happy to run sessions like this externally for other people. So one thing that you should be mindful of as you're navigating this is you need to learn what the process is and know who to ask those questions of. Because another thing about the Canadian legal market is it's a very insular, small market. And so you want to, anytime you are interfacing with an employer or a recruiter, to have all of this process and these questions that you have about the process figured out so that you can present your best face forward when you're talking to a potential recruiter or an employer or even a school you're hoping to get into. Another thing that I hear a lot and everyone hears a lot is I need Canadian experience in order to be competitive, or they're not going to consider me at all if I don't have Canadian experience. And while there are some employers that might favor people who have Canadian experience, you sort of have to ask yourself, why might that be the case? And often, when somebody is preferring somebody who's had some immersion in the Canadian legal market or Canadian experience, their concerns are more around how you're going to function in that workspace. Are you going to be able to be compelling to my Canadian clients in the same way that Canadian lawyers might be? Are you going to be able to small talk with clients and potential external counsel or opposing counsel in the ways that they're used to communicating with other lawyers? And so it's not that you need the Canadian experience to show that you can do those things. You just need to prove to me that you are able to function in the ways I need you to in courthouses, with clients, at social dinners, at professional engagements. And those are things that are easy to learn. And those are things that are easy to convince other people of. But the other thing you need to remember is law is very similar across the world. the legislation and the case law might be different, but how you approach that issue, how you think about it, and how you advise on it is going to be very similar. And so you already have a lot of the legal skills that the employers are already looking for. It's just not specifically in the Canadian context. And so are you then able to translate that to a Canadian employer in a way that makes them satisfied that yes, you would be able to handle this kind of issue, these kind of clients, these kinds of topics. So stop thinking that, oh, I just need any Canadian experience in order to show what I can do. Think of how you can translate the wealth of experience you have in a way that's meaningful to the Canadian employer. There are some things that do need to happen in order for you to be successful. And the first is that you will need to advocate for yourself. And a lot of you do come from jurisdictions where that's not necessary at all. The school you went to dictates the kind of roles you get, the training and mentorship you've got uh, leads you into your next role or other kinds of work that you might be exposed to because of what you did before. And so there wasn't this need to sort of advocate or speak up for yourself because your credentials or your experience spoke for itself. That's just not going to be true here for two reasons. First, we don't know the people you've worked with. We don't necessarily know all of the rankings of the schools you've been in, and we don't know how that compares with some of the Canadian schools or experience that you might have got. And so that context is lost when you come to Canada. And so without you telling us how amazing your schooling or experience has been, no one's going to do that for you, and we're not going to automatically know how impressive a candidate you are. And secondly, a lot of you do come from jurisdictions where, you don't even have to interview for jobs or make a resume or write a cover letter that's compelling. And you're going to need to learn how to do some of those things. And in those application pieces, be very specific about how impressive a candidate you are. Be explicit about the skills that are relevant and equivalent to Canada and how impressive the experiences and education you have in your past home jurisdiction are and how they translate into the Canadian legal marketplace. It's also a test ultimately of your legal skills. As a lawyer, you need to have excellent written and oral advocacy skills. And so if you can't do that for yourself, how can anyone trust that you're going to be able to do that for a legal client or on a legal issue? So it's a skill it's going to take practice, but it's a skill that you're going to need to start developing. Learn how to write compellingly to advocate for yourself on applications, on emails, on intentions to connect with employers, as well as excellent oral advocacy when you're at networking events, when you're in interviews, when you're meeting people for informational coffee interview chats. Make sure you learn how to advocate for yourself because no one else is doing that for you. And absolutely true, there are going to be cultural differences. The first thing I want all of you to remember is everybody in the Canadian legal space will want to help you. We all know how difficult it is to get jobs. We know how difficult it is to enter the market. We know how difficult law is as a whole. And having gone through these kind of processes, having understood what this space is, we always want to help the next generation of lawyers and people who are trying to enter. However, the difference you need to be mindful of is different people can help you in different ways, and not everyone can help you in exactly the same way. So, for example, even Megan and myself, we can help you with the accreditation and licensing, but a lot of your questions towards paralegal licensing or paralegal accreditation in different jurisdictions, you're going to have to ask the people who are experts in that field. And so, know who to ask your questions to, know who can help you in what way. I often say in career counseling, a senior partner is a great person to network with, but they might not have hired anybody in the last 25 years. And so they have no idea what their hiring processes are. And so it's ineffective to meet with a senior partner to talk about the hiring practices of their firm if they have not been connected to the hiring practices of their firm in that many years. So people will want to help, but make sure you, again, start from a point where you've researched who you're talking to, what they might be able to help you on so that you maximize the time you have with them to get the information that they are uniquely suited to giving you. A big cultural difference again speaks to advocating for yourself. A lot of you do come from jurisdictions that may look down on you being boastful, you trying to communicate what you've done in your past. Maybe it seems egotistical. In the Canadian context, you need to remember that a lot of the achievements you've had, a lot of the things you've worked on are just facts of your past. And so you're not being overly egotistical or boastful when you're communicating some of those things. You just need to make sure you're telling it to me in a way that makes me excited about who you are, excited about why you're coming here, excited about why you want to work in this space. And so you need to make sure you are advocating on how impressive a candidate you are. And some of you will have to practice talking about yourselves, talking about your skills, talking about your achievements. Because again, if you don't do it for yourself, no one's doing it on your behalf. So you cannot be passive in your own career, and you're going to have to practice being a little bit more active and advocating for yourself. Another huge difference is that there are differences in application materials, in how you network, in interpersonal interactions in the Canadian legal space. So resumes, for example, there is a format and structure to them, which I'll get to. And there's ways to write your bullet points in compelling ways that isn't just vague or overbroad, but also are not overly dense and too long. In the Canadian context, you have to be concise and to the point, but also get as much information into those concise bullet points as possible. Networking is something that a lot of different jurisdictions don't have. Networking in order to get a lead for a job, networking to learn more about a firm. Whereas in Canada, that is paramount to job hunting. The ways you learn how one firm is different from another is by networking, is by meeting with lawyers from those spaces. The ways you understand what practice areas are growing and necessary are by engaging in conferences, meeting other people, meeting people who are in that space, doing your own research. And even in interpersonal interactions, I like to say that, Canadian small talk is something you have to practice. It's something that you have to prepare for. Canadians like talking about what they did on the weekends. Canadians like talking about what the weather is like. And so make sure you get into the space where you are prepared to talk about the things that you've done on the weekend. You are prepared to comment on the difference in weather changes because, again, that's how people develop rapport with each other in Canada. And if you're not familiar with that kind of interaction, it's going to take practice. Be confident. Again, the things that you're coming to the table with, the skills, the experiences, your passion, your excitement, you have to be confident in order to sound confident, in order for people to find it exciting. Ultimately, you're the one who has to convince me as an employer or as a school to hire you or to admit you. And again, so start learning to advocate for yourself in that way. Start trying to explain your past in a way that's compelling and exciting to who you're talking to or what you're applying for. And again, remember that the education you have, the experiences you have, do not speak for themselves. Not every employer is going to be familiar with the rankings of schools from your home jurisdiction. Not every employer is going to be familiar with the kinds of organizations or the rankings of the firms that you've worked with. And so you're the one who's going to need to tell me, I went to the best law school in all of that country. I worked at one of the top 5 law firms from that country, which makes me exactly the kinds of top tier candidates that your firm is looking for. You're going to need to practice that kind of language, practice telling it to me in that way, and practice writing it on your applications in that way. Because nobody is going to advocate for you but you. And ultimately, you are unique. The jurisdiction you come from, the perspectives you have, the skills and education you bring, those are unique to you. And I am, as an employer, I, as a school, am looking for amazing, unique candidates. And so you're going to have to tell me how you're unique. And again, it just takes practice. It takes doing it multiple times. It takes, applying lots of places, getting some feedback on those applications, making those changes so that it becomes compelling in the future. The first thing I'm going to go through in terms of job hunting is the kinds of jobs. Again, a lot of the questions that come through, we're talking about paralegal versus law. Some people are already knowing about what articling is versus licensing. So the first thing about continuing on from my last page about you advocating for yourself is you advocating for knowing where you are in the process. It's really important that an employer knows if they're hiring for a job that you are eligible for that job. So whether that's knowing whether or not you have the credentials or qualifications for that job, whether you have the right immigration status to apply for that job, knowing whether or not you're eligible in terms of the time frame for that job, all of those things are things that you need to be prepared for. So again, going back to sort of Megan's presentation, do you know where you are in the accreditation timeline? Do you know where you are in the licensing process? Do you know when you will be eligible to start any of these kind of jobs that are posted? That's something that you're going to have to plan out and figure out, map out on a timeline so that you're clear. If a job starts for a specific date, yes, I know I will be eligible to do that kind of work when that job starts. Which leads me to the different types of jobs that get posted for specifically law students and people who are looking to become lawyers. You're going to hear terms like 2L summer student. A 2L summer student is based on the Canadian education, Canadian legal education, where a student has a summer in between their second and third year of law school. So it's a job that takes place in the summer period. It happens for about 3 months, usually in the May to August timeline. And it's a full-time job that exists during that summer month. Lots of firms who are recruiting for 2L summer positions will also consider NCA students. But as an NCA student, as an internationally trained lawyer, while you're going through the accreditation process, you are eligible to apply for these kind of roles because a second year summer student is equivalent to somebody who has not yet finished law school, which is equivalent to somebody who has not finished the NCA process of accreditation. And so if you are still in the process of accreditation, if you know you're going to need more time in order to finish accreditation with the NCA, then you are eligible for this second year summer position job. You're going to see terms like OCIs. OCIs are on-campus interviews for these second-year summer positions. And so the recruitment process for these jobs is you apply in the summer, and during sometime in the fall, there's an interview. And on on-campus interviews are where employers go to each of the law school campuses on their campus and interview the students from each of those schools that they're interested in. And again, as an internationally trained lawyer, there's a specific day that the employers are doing virtual interviews with internationally trained lawyers. So again, you are not excluded from this process. You can be participating in this process, but you need to know, are these roles that I'm eligible for, and will I be able and free to take some of these interviews during the fall? The subsequent two terms, articling and law practice placement, law practice program placements, these are when you're done with your accreditation and starting licensing. So you finished all of what NCA has said, you are equivalent to a Canadian JD Law School graduate, and you can now enter licensing with a licensing body. Articling is across all of Canada. It's typically anywhere from 8 to 10 months where you are an articling student at law who is supervised by an articling principal who is responsible and liable for all of the work that you've done. So you're basically a trainee lawyer in the different provinces, and your work is being supervised. Law practice program is specific to Ontario. So for those of you who are interested in licensing in Ontario, there's a law practice program that helps people get through licensing. And in that program, there are specific job placements, and those placements are also similar in that you are being supervised and overseen as a legal trainee before you become a full lawyer. And so again, depending on where you are, if you know your timeline, if you know that the summer job is existing and starting in a time where you are still going through the accreditation process, you should apply for those. If you are applying for an articling job, then make sure that you have finished all of the accreditation process by the time that that job starts, then you can apply for that job as well. Again, a lot of people who come from different jurisdictions are bringing the terminology of their home jurisdictions to Canada. And so lots of students will come and say, oh, I need to be a law clerk first or a legal assistant in order to become a lawyer, because that's how it was back home. And it's just different in Canada. Law clerks and legal assistants are not steps towards becoming a lawyer here in Canada. They are careers and full jobs in themselves, and people are in those roles for a long term or for the duration of their career. And so, if you are looking to become a lawyer, being a legal assistant or a law clerk might help you with getting some experience, getting exposure to areas of law, but it's not a necessary step in order to become a licensed lawyer in Canada. And so, be mindful, are you looking to just get the experience? Or is this a role you're genuinely wanting because you're not sure about licensing yet? And again, have that reflected in your application so that an employer knows if they hire you as a legal assistant, they're not having to replace you in, 6 months to a year because you're hoping to make that an actual articling student job. Alternatively, don't apply for the legal assistant job hoping that it is an articling job, because those are just different roles completely and you're going to be doing different types of work. And again, as we've already mentioned a few times, paralegal in Ontario is a licensed practitioner of law in its own right with a parallel licensing process. And so if you're interested in becoming a licensed paralegal in Ontario, that's something that you can consider and look towards getting the information for. And again, in different provinces, paralegal has different designations and terminology. In some different provinces, for example, in BC, even being a notary public is different in terms of terminology and what they can do as compared to all the other provinces. And so really take a look at what kind of work you're interested in and what does that fall under in terms of terminology and titles in the jurisdiction you're going into. Where to look for jobs? Networking is key. Networking is huge. 90% of jobs that exist out there are gained through networking. You're shortlisted for interviews because you've networked with those employers before. And so you're going to have to put yourself out there and meet with people, talk to people in order to access a lot of the legal jobs that exist. Online postings are fine, but if you found them, thousands of other people have found them. And so an online posting alone becomes a sort of critical mass of numbers, and the employer can only consider so many applications. It's always important to do your research. Different firms will recruit in different ways. Again, some of the law firms might recruit through this structured summer recruitment or articling recruitment process as outlined by the different working groups or licensing bodies in each jurisdiction. Other organizations might have their own internal hiring practices, especially if you're applying in-house or to an organization or to a big corporation. They have ways of doing things that are very different from the rest of the legal community. And so it's really important to do your own research. How might this employer recruit? How might this employer receive applications? Who can I connect with at these organizations before submitting an application? So the application itself, once you've done all of your research and networking, you know you're applying to them, you know that you're a good job for this, you're a good match for this job. You've done all that research. Make sure you realize it takes a lot of preparation time. Students in our programs who've met with me one time think, oh, I'm going to have Michael look at my resume and cover letter once, make changes, and it's going to be perfect, and I can send it out to hundreds of different employers. And they soon realize when I'm being critical of their applications that it takes time to tailor the words, it takes time to make it compelling, and it takes time to convince each employer that this is the job that you for sure want. And so don't underestimate how much time it might take to not only prepare your application package, but to tailor it to different organizations and employers. So there's no one size fits all. The different application documents that you should be prepared to provide, however, are things like your resume. It's a 2-page resume, a 1-page cover letter, have your official transcripts or copies of your official transcripts. If they're not in English, have translations, English translations of those official transcripts. Where possible, try to find a grading scale of those transcripts, especially if you're from a jurisdiction that Canadian employers might not be familiar with, you know, a 32-point scale for second class degrees, a 16-point scales. Have the grading scale be clear to what that means. And if there's an equivalency at all, provide that as well. Typically, those can be found on the backs of your official transcripts in terms of what the rankings and the gradings mean. So provide that as a part of your application package as well. Some employers might ask for a writing sample. Some employers might ask for reference letters or reference contacts. And so again, you're going to need to prepare all of these things in advance in order to apply to have it all be in an application package. One thing I like to tell students also is if you have found a posting that you are applying to, save the posting. Often students will say to me, oh, but it's not due until Friday, so I'm going to wait until Friday to send it. And then the posting disappears by Wednesday, maybe because they've closed it, maybe because they've already hired somebody. And so always save the posting. Don't wait until the last day to apply. Apply as soon as possible so that you don't miss out on that chance. And then I'm going to talk about format, font, and length in my next slides. So a resume. A resume is a 2-page resume. You can see here, typically a Canadian legal resume especially has a header with your contact information. It goes directly into education. For internationally trained lawyers, I usually like to say, have this be an education and qualification section so you can indicate if you were a called lawyer in another jurisdiction, where you are in the NCA accreditation or licensing process. And then it goes directly into your work experience. I want to get into the work you've done before, the impressive experience that you've had. And so get to that as soon as possible, which means sometimes avoiding having a skills section or an objective section, because again, a lot of those things are things you can emphasize in terms of skills in your bullet points, and your objectives can be more laid out in a cover letter. Avoid long lists because it's very difficult to read through long lists. Be specific with your language and these bullet points. I often see a lot of them, especially internationally trained lawyers, just say things like, I represented this client on this file. I represented this other client on this other file. I assisted on this other file. And while that's all fine and good, your job title of being a lawyer or an advocate or an associate already tells me you represented clients and assisted on files. It's the specific skills that I'm going to be looking for. Specific skills also relevant to my practice area that I'm going to be looking for. So things like legal research, advocacy, communication skills, make sure those are the words that come up. If you're applying to places like corporate law, make sure due diligence, shareholders agreements, make sure drafting and reviewing contracts, those are skills that come up. If you're applying to litigation focused firms, again, advocacy, evidence, cross-examinations, discoveries. Make sure those are the kinds of words and skills that come up because those are the kinds of things I'm looking for, not just to see, oh, you were a lawyer in Nigeria and you represented 20 different clients, because again, it doesn't break down. Do you have the exact skills that I'm going to be looking for? So be specific with the skills languages that you're using in each of these bullet points. And also have multiple versions. Like I said, if you're applying only to corporate firms, maybe you have versions of your resume that are for corporate firms. Whereas if you're applying to a public sector or an NGO organization, you're going to be emphasizing different skills and different examples of your work. And so make sure you have multiple versions of your applications. When I'm talking about skills, especially in this kind of presentation to new immigrants, to new Canadian immigrants, I'd like to show you there are lots of different skills you can talk about. So when you're talking about dealing with clients, it's not just represented this client, were you managing their expectations? Were you protecting their client confidentiality? When you're talking about some of your like research and writing, don't just say research this, publish this. Fact gathering is a part of research. Strategy planning is a part of knowledge acquisition. And so be be mindful that there's lots of different skills you can present, and lots of different ways you can present those skills. A cover letter is one page. It is supposed to not just be, hi, here's my application, please consider it, but it really is supposed to be your chance to showcase your connection to the firm that you're applying to, shows the skills and experiences and knowledge you bring that are relevant to the employer that you're applying to, the explicit connection of those skills and experiences from back home to the Canadian legal workplace that you're applying to. And you're trying to create a story. Lots of times I'm talking to legal recruiters and employers, and they just say, I want to know what this person's journey is, what their story is about, why they're doing what they're doing. And so you're going to need to write it more narratively. You're going to need to tell me why you're doing what you're doing, why you're here, why you left your amazing experience back home, and how that's going to help me and my company grow and be even better. And you're going to have to explain it in a way that is explicit, argumentative, and showcases all of these things from your past that are relevant to Canada now, which means it needs to be tailored. It's going to sound different for each employer, and you can't expect just to lift out one sentence or one paragraph of each application and have it read the same for each employer. Because again, each employer is going to care about different parts of your journey. They're going to sort of resonate with some of the different skills you bring to the table, some of the experiences that you've had. Some are going to matter more to one employer versus another. Treat it like you're writing a thesis. I often like to say, again, this is an example of your written advocacy skills for yourself. And so your thesis is hire me. And so all of your paragraphs should be proof of that thesis of why you should be hired. And if you write it in that way, and again, a lot of you have come with lots of education, and so I know a lot of you can write theses and papers. If you write it in that way, you realize you do need to be explicit. You can't just say, I did this thing back home, and have the reader know how that's relevant to them. You have to make the linkage clear and make it explicit. So avoid vague language, avoid not proving things that you're saying. And I think of the best way to avoid some of that is to treat this like an essay or a research paper that you're writing. A typical cover letter I see lots is, an address, a subject line, a salutation. Hi, I'm an internationally trained lawyer. I'm looking to learn and grow. A paragraph about my experience, a paragraph about my skill, maybe a sentence or a paragraph about the firm. I'm looking to hear from you. Employers are very used to seeing this, but it's not very exciting to them because, again, it's not just about what happened in your past, it's about how it's relevant to the present. And so rethink some of that. Instead of just telling me you're an internationally trained lawyer, you did your school here, you are passionate about X, give it a chance to introduce why all of your education has been has there's a line through all of your education about what kinds of things you've been passionate about, and that's why you studied what you studied, or that's why you sought out the schools you sought out, or that's why you worked at the places you worked in, and give it a chance to be an introduction to who you genuinely are and not just the qualifications you have. Similarly, with your experiences, don't just list out your most impressive experiences and leave it there for the reader to figure out. Really curate those experiences and show why it's relevant to the law that this place does, why the experience is relevant to the work that they do, why how they treat their clients is the way you treated your clients back home. Similarly with skills, how do you know that the skills that you're emphasizing are the ones that we're looking for at this job? Did you talk to somebody? Did they talk about how necessary those skills are and how you've exampled those skills back home? So again, try where possible to refer every paragraph to this specific job or this specific employer so that the application itself cannot read like it's for just anybody, but it's for this employer specifically. Hopefully you apply, hopefully you get the job and have made the connections and you get into the interview portion. For preparing for interviews, I always like to say have a minute or two to say about every single thing on your application, because one of the worst questions in a job interview is they point to something from 15 years ago and they say, "Tell me about that." Can you have something to say about something 15 years ago on your resume? Can you make it relevant to that employer? So reflect on your application, every sentence, every bullet point. Do you have a minute or two to say about it? And can you find some way to connect it back to that job? Canadian interviews are also often behavioral based. A lot of interviewers will ask behavioral based interview questions, and these can be posed one of two ways. But ultimately, a behavioral-based interview question is trying to get at how does the applicant solve a problem? And so the behavioral-based interview question can be posed as an hypothetical, the hypothetical being something like, tell me a time, sorry, a, a hypothetical being, you are the articling student that we've hired, and you are having a difficult interaction with one of the other articling students. What would you do? The other way to ask that would be as an experiential question. So, can you tell me a time where you've had a disagreement with a coworker or a peer? You can see how, whether it's asked as a hypothetical or give me an example, it's asking the same question. It's an interpersonal conflict. How would you deal with that conflict? And there are lots of ways to answer behavioral-based interview questions, but the way that most legal employers are used to is is by answering it in a very specific way where you address similar to Iraq in fact patterns, where you address what is the issue. What did you do about it? What were all the action items that you took on it? And how does that lead to the natural conclusion? And by structuring your answer in that way, you're going to really showcase to an employer how you solve problems. There are also differences in legal private sector interviews versus public sector interviews. Private sector interviews are more interpersonal. They're trying to get to know you. They're going to ask you more behavioral based questions. And in public sector interviews, they're typically more substantive. They ask you about the law, the legislation, what you know about it. And one of my final pieces of advice for all of you is to practice your answers out loud. I think legal professionals, law students are really good at thinking about questions, are really good about thinking about what their answers might be to a specific thing, but or even thinking about what they might say if they were asked to tell people who they are and tell me about your experience. But until you practice it out loud, until you practice it in English, until you practice it over and over again, it's not going to come out natural and conversational. And so, most important, I would say, is to practice all of the things in preparing for your job interviews out loud on Zoom. Record yourself if you can, so that you can catch yourself. Am I sounding confident? Am I sounding impressive? Am I being convincing? Am I advocating for myself? So as Megan mentioned, you can always contact us for questions about our program. I know certainly sometimes our recruitment coordinators get questions about career as well, and sometimes they get diverted to me. So feel free where possible, if you can't find any other resources, to reach out to our team, and we'll do our best to help you. And that's it for my portion. I'm happy to take any questions that have come in.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that very practical and insightful guidance session, all the information that you provided. Very hands-on advice, focused on your mindset and preparation needed to succeed in the Canadian legal market. So, and Michael has also emphasized the importance of being proactive. Definitely, in any career, in anything you do, be proactive, advocate for yourself, and first of all, become familiar with the legal landscape in order to confidently present your unique experience, which Michael has stressed. So he's also highlighted that you need soft skills and you need to have the ability to translate your past experience to the Canadian context. In addition to being able to, small talk, very important. I completely agree with you. I know I struggled with it a little bit when I immigrated because I was so focused on my goals and my technical skills that I had to work to develop my soft skills. So a lot of actionable insights and um, also, like you said, be aware of who to approach for guidance, ask the right questions, tailor your resume and application to different employers, and be very conscientious in preparing your application materials. So a lot of great information. Thank you, Michael. So there's one question that I'd like to ask. What are your thoughts on using AI or Chat GPT to help with cover letters or in your resume?
So I'm of two minds about it. I think AI are great tools. I think there are lots of really unique ways and prompts you can use to get creative about how to write these applications. However, it's not go and the AI prompts are not going to know the depths of your experience. They're not going to know what's exciting about your experience. And so it only goes so far if you're using it as a first step and as a first draft of your resume and cover letter. I think it really is on you, if you are using those things, to first make sure you edit. The amount of times I've seen the Chat GPT hyphen in cover letters is also already quite shocking. And so I've had to call students out on it, like, I can tell this is a Chat GPT input and you haven't edited at all. It also, if I can tell that, it makes me subconsciously feel like maybe the student is not taking this seriously or is not really proofreading their work, which is concerning to me as a lawyer. But again, to my point, the chat GPT isn't going to know what another lawyer is excited about with the previous work that you've done before. What is it about that employer that made that file difficult? What is it about that agreement that made it so hard to draft? And you're the one who's going to be able to impress on that. And so while AI can help and facilitate, I don't think it should be the final draft. It should be at most the first or second draft, and you should be sending in maybe a fourth or fifth draft before you send in that application.
Excellent. I completely agree with you. So thank you. Megan, I see that you've been answering a lot of questions in the chat, specific questions. So let me just, if there's a subject you'd like to speak to, please go ahead. But let me ask you one question. You did answer it, but let me just ask you. Could you explain if to work as a presiding officer for quasi hearings, do I need to be admitted to the bar? Also, does the NCA have any policy regarding exemptions based on work experience in Canada?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question and might have a surprising answer. So, I think for a lot of administrative tribunal work in Canada, so to work as a hearings officer for something like the Immigration and Refugee Board, you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer. The good thing about any kind of public sector opportunity like that is there's always a posted job ad. Because in the public sector, we are required to have a sort of more objective recruitment process. And it would tell you whether a law degree is required or whether being licensed to practice in Canada is required or whether any other kind of experience is required. So um, if it's not required, then having the experience would just be a plus. But certainly any baseline requirements would be there. Um, and so that's always a key thing to keep in mind when you're applying for jobs is to look at what are the baseline requirements and making sure that you mention those if you have them. In terms of the NCA, their policy only has very limited circumstances in which work experience is relevant. Probably the one that comes up the most often is, let's say you have very low grades from your law degree. In some jurisdictions, you can get a law degree with what's called pass class or third class honors, where you might have had very low grades throughout. If you have that classification of law degree without work experience, the NCA probably won't recognize that degree and will make you go back to school in Canada as part of your NCA process. But if you have been licensed as a lawyer and worked as a lawyer, that experience can cure the low grades and allow you to have a more favorable assessment. So work experience in most cases, your NCA assessment is purely based on your education. On the other hand, though, in Ontario specifically, the Law Society does take work experience into account if you would like an exemption or abridgment from experiential training. I think there may be one or two other provinces in Canada where the Law Society takes that into account. So it can be relevant in other circumstances.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. So you did mention webinars and information sessions. So if somebody wanted to have a one-on-one conversation and they're outside the country, can they email your team or somebody within Osgood and say, I'd like to schedule a chat? Is that something you do with overseas
Absolutely. Yep.
students? Okay.
Yep. What we've tried to do over the years is provide a whole bunch of information on our website, including some pre-recorded information sessions. And that's because sometimes if you're overseas at the moment when you want the information, it might be 1 o'clock in the morning here and we won't be here. So, by all means, use those resources if they're available. But absolutely, we're more than happy to be contacted either through the contact us form on our website or at the recruitment email address, which I'll put in the chat again. Just email us, let us know what you're interested in. If you have a CV or resume, you're welcome to send that to us. That helps us to look at what your experience is and give you better advice. And we can either correspond with you by email or we're happy to set up a time for a Zoom meeting to talk about your questions.
Thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of our session. So let's wrap up. Great points, important points. And like Michael said, no one size fits all. So figure out what you want, do your research, take the action that works for you based on your own unique experience, and do this with confidence. And Megan has offered very specific information about different courses. And I would definitely rewatch this recording and please do share it with others who might not have been able to attend. And as we've said, this will be shared on our YouTube channel and our website, so you can always go ahead and access the information. So once again, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to everyone for attending our web conference series offered in partnership with Osgood Professional Development. And it's great that Michael and Megan took the time to share their skills and expertise and knowledge with everyone. So once again, feel free to rewatch the webinar on our website or the YouTube channel. And if you have any questions for us or specific articles you'd like to cover, like us to cover on our website, send us an email at info@canadianimmigrant.ca. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to keeping in touch. Megan and Michael, thank you for coming back every year and offering us such great information. Have a good
Thanks,
day,
Sammy.
or